So welcome back, everybody. We are starting off another round of lightning talk. So these are 20 minutes fast and furious. And our very first is from Mark Russell. I am thrilled, Mark, that you agreed to join. So some of you may be wondering, we're talking about corporate innovation. We're talking about facilitation. We're talking about, where should hybrid teams meeting? And here we have a comic book author. What up? Well, creativity, number one, but also one of the great things we're trying to do in this experiment is we're trying to get teams together, and they've got 90 minutes to unleash their creativity on a complex challenge. The team maybe knows nothing about this challenge when they start, right? They're starting with like, okay, what are some of the challenges we've got? How do we drive the circular economy? What is that? If I put that in front of my family, they're going to have no clue what we're talking about. So one of our theories is that there are better ways to communicate complex information. And Mark is here to talk about how comics might be one of the ways that we can unleash team creativity on those complex challenges more quickly. So Mark is it GLAAD? Do you just say GLAAD? Or do you have to do the acronyms? Okay, GLAAD and Eisner award-winning writer of comic book. He's written some of the most iconic characters in comics, including Superman, Batman, the Avengers, the Flintstones, and the Fantastic Four, and has also made many of his own creations into successful comic book titles, including Billionaire Island, Second Coming, and Not All Robots. He's also the author of 2 books about fabulous topics from the Bible. And Mark and I went to high school together. I once got grounded for a month and a half because he kept me out too late playing Bible trivia. So with that, turning it over to you, Mark.
Yeah. Thanks for that introduction. Well, thanks everybody. And yeah, I'll try to make it so that Elise hasn't made a horrible mistake by inviting me. So I know this is completely off the charts for what you're probably expecting or used to. But I do think that comics hold some lessons for people, regardless of what artistic or professional field you are in terms of collaboration and thinking about the accessibility of your work. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit, evangelize the medium, why I think the medium is excellent for creative and artistic expression, and also talk a little bit about what I've learned from working in comics as a collaborator, somebody working with teams to solve common goals and challenges. So I have a short PowerPoint show, which I'm going to bring up now, and forgive me if this doesn't go smoothly. I haven't had a real job. Okay, so why comics? And for me, the biggest single reason to do comics or to think in terms of comics when you're trying to communicate ideas is that they are incredibly accessible. They expand the literary range of your audience. You can talk to anybody from the age of like 7 to the age of 80. They don't even have to be a particularly strong reader to get what's going on in a comic. And they also enjoy on multiple levels. I mean, I think the good thing about comics for me is that I can engage in social commentary or talk about philosophical ideas that obsess me, but do so within the context of a story where if people aren't interested in those sorts of things, they can just focus on the story. Or if people, are interested in those things, it's like when you give somebody a vitamin pill, if it tastes like an old Duracell battery, they're not going to look forward to the vitamins. But if it, tastes like a gummy, like a cherry gummy, they're much more likely to take the vitamins. So I feel like in a lot of ways, comics are the cherry gummy for larger ideas. And I think they're also incredibly versatile. You can use them to tell just about any kind of story you want. And it doesn't even have to be a story. You can use it to break down nonfiction subjects. In fact, they're ideal for breaking down things which are really complex and hard to describe using words and or just very visceral human experience as well. In fact, comics have been used successfully to talk about pretty much any human experience you can think of, including the civil rights movement. I was lucky enough to actually meet Congressman John Lewis and Andrew Aden and Nate Powell because we had a book coming out at the same time. So we did a lot of publicity stuff together, and it's a very moving story. It's a powerful part of our history. And it wouldn't be the same in any other medium other than comics because of the reasons I've said. It's not only accessible to such a wide audience, but allows you to see things visually that then in turn creates a visceral experience within you that you wouldn't have if you were at the extra layer of abstraction of just reading it as words in a book, I think. It's also been used to break down the 9/11 Commission because a lot of the topics are about, engineering, steel integrity, and aerodynamics, which are incredibly dry in a journal, in a presses that's just words, but suddenly become to life when you can actually show people graphs and diagrams and pictures to demonstrate what they're talking about. And they did a good job in the adaptation of the 9/11 Commission to combine both the science and the engineering with the human element on the ground that was going on. And so in a lot of ways, it captures that event in a way that couldn't be done in any other medium because it's frozen information like you'd expect in a book, but it's also brought to life with visuals and with human characters and their interactions with on the experiences that day. I also think, you could do stories, obviously, like fantasy and sci-fi, which is one of the things that that I think everyone understands about comics. But you have an unlimited special effects budget in comics. You can write any kind of story. You can write set stories on other planets. You can have intergalactic battles between spaceships. You can do whatever you want, and it costs the same as if you're writing, a comic book about a man, about a monk, with a quill, right? Writing parchments all day. And so it has this enormous advantage of being able to take you anywhere in the galaxy, anywhere in the universe, for next to nothing. Which brings me to my next point about comics and why it's such a great medium. It's because it's cheap. It's not nearly as expensive as TV or movies to produce, and yet it's just as, I think, thrilling as visual medium. And the advantage of this is that when you're making a comic, you don't have focus groups you've got to answer to. You don't have executives looking over your shoulder to make sure you're not wasting their money, because the investment in writing a comic book and producing a comic book is relatively much less than that of a TV or movie show. So the advantage of that then is that you are able to take chances. You're able to tell stories or to think outside the box in a way you're not really allowed to do in other visual mediums, which are more expensive, where everyone's trying to control their costs. And it's also relatively cheap for readers to take a chance. They might not know who you are. They might not know anything about this title, but to take a chance on a $4 comic book versus, a $20 movie experience, they're more likely to take chances on something they aren't necessarily sure they're going to like, which is great because that's how you find the majority of your new readers. And I think that, as I mentioned before, the cheapness sort of fosters experimentation. There's more kinds of stories out there. You're able to tell stories that wouldn't be able to exist in any other mediums because you're able to get away with it because the financial risk is not that great for creating comics. And I think another big reason why I love comics as a medium, why I recommend it for everyone, is that it works the same way the human brain works. By which I mean there's a mix of exteriority and interiority happening at the same time. When you read a novel, and nothing against novels or books, I love them. I read more of those than I do of comics, but it's purely interior experience. You're reading and you're in your own head, which is a wonderful experience to have. But I think that the way the human brain naturally works is that you're going through nature, you're walking down the street, you're absorbing visual information, and while you're thinking about it in your head. And so comics feels kind of like a seamless extension of the human psyche that way, where you're constantly absorbing outside information, visual information, and yet you're able to sort of stop and think about it. You're not just greeted by an onslaught of visual information that never relents like you would be in a movie or a TV show. So it works roughly the same way our brains work, which I think is one of the reasons why it's so accessible, because we could just sort of navigate a comic book without having to sort of brace ourselves for, okay, I'm going to sit down and read for an hour. It feels less like reading than it does just walking through down the street of an alien world, or the world that the creators have chosen to show you. And I think as a creator, one of the things I've really learned, one of the things I really appreciate about comics is that it really fosters collaboration. Uh, and I think it fosters collaboration because the teams that work on comics are relatively small. So there's good collaboration and there's bad collaboration. And to me, a bad collaboration would be if you have like an assembly line, everybody working in a factory and everybody does one thing and nobody understands the impacts or cares the impacts of the thing they're having at the beginning of the line has on people at the end of the line. Or, environments where there's no collaboration whatsoever. Everyone's just sort of working independently on their own thing and they never come to contact. Comics is not like either of those. Comics fosters, I think, good collaboration because the teams are small and everybody sort of has to understand each other's job. I might not be as good an artist as the person drawing the comic, but I understand the demands that my writing are placing on them. I understand that I can't have, crowd scenes in every panel. I can't have like horse battles, knights, in like 6 panels of this in a page, because I know it's just not enough room to draw horses and not enough space for the dialogue I'm creating. So I have to understand what the artist is going through when I put something down in the notes for them to draw, and they in turn have to understand what I'm going through when they draw it, because they have to leave enough dead space, enough sort of like ambient space for the speech balloons to go into. To give you an example of what I'm talking about, this all kind of combines to what I call mission-oriented empathy, which is what you really strive for in collaboration. Collaboration is mission-oriented empathy, where you're all working towards a similar end, but you understand the demands that your work is placing on other people, and you collaborate by making sure that you understand their job enough that you give them reasonable, achievable expectations. But here, to get back to what I was talking about, here's a panel which just seems like a normal panel. You probably see this 100 times in a comic book. This is one I wrote for a title called Superman Space Age with artist Mike Allred, and his wife Laura Allred does the colors. But because I understand that this is just one panel of like 5 panels on a page, I can't have too much happening in this panel. So I just put 2 characters. But there's a lot of information in the panel. There's Superman and his father, Jonathan Kent. They're shucking corn, clearly on their farm in Kansas. So there's a lot of information packed in this panel, even though it's relatively easy to draw. There's just 2 characters and some buckets of corn. But you instantly know where you are and the relationship of these characters and what's going on based upon what's drawn. And Mike, for his part, engaged in mission-oriented empathy by leaving enough sort of dead space at the top of the panel where there's not really anything going on that the reader has to see, so that we can put in the word balloons. And this is how it works. It's like I write stuff that I know that he can reasonably draw in this one of 5 panels on a page, and he draws them, composes them in such a way that the writing, the dialogue, and the placement caps can all kind of work in conjunction with his art. And so that is mission-oriented empathy, where we all know the demands we're placing on each other with our work, and we respect it. And the result is a finished project that looks seamless and accessible. So some of the lessons I've learned from collaborating in comics is to respect others' creativity. Don't give them too much information. Don't overload them with information. Give them what they need to know, and then let them sort of surprise you with sort of creative answers they come up with. And as I mentioned before, you got to know enough about other people's jobs that you know what you're asking of them. And it doesn't mean that you have to do their job, or that you have to know their job intimately in and out. It just means that you have to know enough that you're not asking them to do the impossible and then getting mad at them when they don't deliver. You're giving them objectives that are very deliverable, and they in turn are showing you the same respect, and together you create a much better final product. And I think the key to is like to remain mission oriented, so that if there are disagreements, if there are sort of you're working at cross purposes, you can always come back to what the goal is that you're trying to work on, you create together, and then that often wrinkles those out. For the purposes of comics, you have sort of a referee who is sort of the mission control of the comic, called the editor. And they're the ones, if there is a disagreement on which way to go, they are the ones that decide who's right, or which way to go. And I think also an important factor for me, one thing I've learned in creating comics is don't assume that everyone knows what you're talking about. You can give instructions, but if that doesn't really fit the other person's frame of reference, you're probably not going to get what you asked for. I worked recently with an artist who is Brazilian, and in my art notes, I said they're walking through the wreckage of a Chuck E. Cheese pizza parlor. And he, being Brazilian, had no idea what Chuck E. Cheese was, but he'd been out, he'd had pizza before. So what he drew instead was this really nice sort of like Italian Riviera sort of pizza cafe with like umbrellas and, really chic furnishings, but it wasn't right at all. But it was because I was writing with cultural blind spots in mind. I was just assuming that he would know what a Chuck E. Cheese pizza parlor was. So one of the lessons I've drawn from these experiences is to break everything into as simple terms as possible, and don't assume that everyone has the same sort of cultural background that you do, but try to explain it. And one thing that helps with, especially with a visual medium like comics, is I'll include my own sort of crude drawings to give a rough impression what I imagine it looking like, or sometimes photographs. Like this is kind of what I envision to use as a jumping off point. But I think whatever you can do, just don't assume that everyone shares your same cultural background, or that they will know what you're talking about. The General George Patton had a great line once where he says he never gives an order that can be understood. And people said, well, what do you mean? He says, I give an order that cannot be misunderstood. And I think that is, to me, sort of one of the hallmarks of what I consider good collaboration in comics. Is like, don't give people notes or tell them what you're looking for in a way that can be misunderstood. Make yourself as clear as possible. And so those are some of the big lessons that I've learned from collaborating in comics, which I think are pretty much germane to any other sort of artistic or professional experience you might have. And so that's pretty much the slideshow I prepared. But I think it's I think that's pretty much what I came to say in a nutshell. And I think I guess we're going to open up to Q&A now, if I can unshare my screen.
You need some help unsharing?
There
awesome. Sweet. So I saw
I just
one
live
question.
To share. Okay.
I saw one question, talking about assumptions and whatnot. Bruce asked, what do you think makes a comic a comic?
Me? I think it's sequential storytelling. So it's storytelling where you have plot beats between the panels. And I think this is one of the good things about comics as opposed to other visual mediums, is that the panels give you, there's a saying in comics that the blood is in the gutters, which means that the gutters are what we call the borders between the panels. So you don't have to show everything. You can leave some to the reader's imagination. You don't have to show somebody getting impaled in the face with a sword. You could just sort of have that happen in the gutters, and the next panel moves on. But it allows you to create so much more information in the comic that way, because so many of the things you aren't actually showing, they're happening in the reader's mind between the panels. But to me, that's what comics are. It's like panel-oriented, sequential storytelling, which is both visual and interior.